In this tutorial, we're going to work our way through the two-rail sweep form, looking at all the different options within the form to create components. We're going to use two examples. The first will explore options for open rail designs, and the latter will show you how to create closed rail options similar to the panel you see on the screen. So we're going to start by looking at the open rail options, and start by file open and picking our open rail example.crv 3D file, and we'll see that present on the screen as a number of vectors. Okay, so we'll move straight ahead and take a look at the form. So from the modeling menu, we have our creation tools at the top, and second from the left is the create a shape by sweeping between two rail vectors. As we open this form, there are a number of different variables that will need to be completed, and the first one, as shown, says drive rail. So it's asking us to select the two rails that will form the drive rails. So from the 2D view, I'm going to select this top curve vector and then shift and pick the second vector, come across to the form now and just hit use selection. Immediately on the screen, the vectors are annotated, the first one shown in red and the second one in green, and they have directional arrows that must be in the same direction in order to get the correct form. Now the second item on the menu is to select the cross section. So I'll go straight across here. We've got a number of cross sections below the drive rails. I'm going to select the sort of sweeping curved one first, and you can see that showing as dotted, and I can go straight in now. I'm not going to change anything else on the form and apply, and we will immediately get a two rail sweep on the screen. So I'm going to show these tiled vertically so we can see those side by side, and I'm just going to sort of zoom in so we can take a look at what we are seeing on the screen. So at present we've got a slightly narrower entry point here, and it's slightly wider at the end, but across the top we have got a constant height. We can see that if we look from the side view. Okay, we can constant height, but what we want to do is look at it from a 3D view and just try to analyze what's going on. So if we look, we can see that we've got this sort of constant height through the middle. So if you look at the bottom of the screen where my cursor is now, as I move my cursor through, you can see that the height is remaining approximately the same, which is about 0.57. Now where do we get that measurement from? Well, if I close the form down now and just come and take a look at this vector here, if I use the measure tool and measure from my low point there up to the top point there, we can see our distance there in Y is 0.57. So that's where it's getting that height, and it's maintaining that height all the way through the two rail sweep, irrespective of the width between those two drive rails. So if we close that down now, and I'm just going to delete out the original two rail sweep, and we'll create the same option again. So once again, I pick my first vector, my second vector, and in this case I'm actually coming into the form with them pre-created. So I can come into the form now, just go straight into use selection, and then come down and select my vector. So as I apply that now, we've got the same shape that we saw before. Okay, but now we're going to look at some of the other options on the form, namely here scale to exact height. So if I actually scale that now, we're currently at 0.57, but immediately you'll notice it's scaled up to 1. And if I actually move my cursor along the top, if you look in the bottom of the screen, you can see that height is exactly 1. Okay, running through there. Okay, so we've scaled that height to be 1, once again irrespective of the width between the two. Now the next thing to do is to see how this changes when I change to scale cross sections with width. In other words, it's going to keep the height of 1 inch, but only in the width, in the maximum width. So this will be in this region here running across. We'll probably get a height of 1 just about here, but then it's going to drop off depending upon the width between these two vectors. So as I select that, look in the 3D view, and you'll see that that immediately changes the result. So we can see that it's narrower. In the narrower regions it's lower, and in the wider regions it's higher. And if we actually hover over just about here, you can see in the bottom of the screen it's 1 inch. Okay, so that's scale cross sections with width. We get this variable height depending upon the distance between the two vectors. Okay, now the order in which you pick your drive rails will make a difference. Now this is highlighted by when I pick the very start of the two rail sweep, you can now see the cross section that we used and the point it uses to match the start point on the first drive rail. So this will not necessarily be the start point on the cross-sectional vector, but it will take the far left-hand position and match that to the start point of the first rail. So that's what's being matched, this point to this point, okay, as we can see there. And when I apply, we're going to get the same surface because we're picking the same cross-section through. Now what this does allow me to do whilst this is selected is to add in extra cross sections at various points. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is select a new one to go at this end one. Okay, so with that I'm going to select my cross section. You can see that on the screen there, which is this sort of triangular shape, and then pick this top point here. And we can immediately see that we've got yellow to yellow. So that's saying that this point is going to be snapped onto here, and we're going to get a sort of long edge and with a short edge on this side. And if I apply now, you'll be able to see that change in the 3D view. And we're getting a gradual change from the front sort of curve shape through to the harder triangular shape at the end. Now, I can further govern that by actually adding in extra points. Okay, so with that, I'd like to have the sort of the latter third here being wholly triangular. So what I'm going to do is actually going to click into my first vector there, which adds in a cross section. Okay, so with that I'm now going to apply, and you'll see the effect, which is to keep the section in the last third wholly triangular and only have the graduation from the curved area to the triangular region in this sort of front 2/3. Now I've got even more control here, okay, where I can actually take the points and start to move them around. So if I want this to be exactly running across the screen, I can just get that roughly around about there. And once I'm happy with that, I can then further apply. And if you look to the 3D view, you'll see a slight change in the model now. Okay, so we've just enhanced it. You can see there was a small change there. So we've actually added in this triangular shape in the middle and actually defined the angle of it so we can see the flow. And you can see these other grey lines, which is showing the flow of the surface or the sweep through the cross sections. And we can even go a stage further where I know that I've added the triangular cross section at the end, but maybe I want to override that with another vector. Okay, so what I'm going to do is actually pick this humped feature at the bottom and then come straight in and select it and put it onto that end cross section. So now if I apply, you can see that we've got this quite complex form, which is going from our front rounded shape. It's then changing to the triangular shape in the middle, and then changing across to the very much rounded shape at the far right hand side. And if we twiddle the view there, we can see just the change that we're getting across that form. Okay, now at any particular point I can come back in and override the vectors. So once again, if I want to take this central one here and simply click there, and now this shape will be used not just on the end but also in the middle, and then I can reapply. And you'll see that change through there. So we're getting the morphing really from the front curved shape to this shape by this region in the middle, and then continuing that region all the way to the end. Now if for instance I didn't want that and I just wanted it graduated from the curved shape here to this humped version at the far right hand side, then I would just right mouse key over that cross section and say delete cross section, and then I would need to reapply, and now I could see a better sort of a slower transition from the left hand edge to the right hand edge. So you can just see there that you've got different ways of adding control over the 2-rail sweep surface by being able to add in extra cross sections and to be able to manipulate the start and end points of those cross sections to get the required shape. Now even in the middle of the command I can come in and make modifications to the vectors affecting the surface before I've committed it to the component tree. So I'm going to select the vector now, we can see on the screen, and just hit node to put it into node editing mode, and you can see here that we've got the node points and the tangency vectors shown on the screen. I'm just going to zoom in now so we can see that more closely, and I'm going to just pick these 3 vectors here and just shift them up. Okay, so we're going to give this a nice rounded shape. I'm just using the up arrow on the keyboard. And then maybe I want to come in and maybe change something about my drive rail. So once again, I'm going to come into there, select it, maybe change and move this outwards. Okay, maybe just change the directional vector there, come into the top rail, maybe even add in a new point, right mouse key, insert a point, maybe take that there and just flip this around a little just to change a little shape. And then I can come back to my form now. So what I've done there is modified both drive rails and one of the cross sections, and I can come back into the form and just say reselect the rails. So with that, that will select all the information I need. I can then come back in and reapply, and you'll see the two rail sweep surface dramatically change in the 3D view to reflect the changes that we've made to those vectors. So when I'm happy with that, I can just come back in now and just commit that. So I'm going to call this example 1 and just apply and say start new component, ready to look at another example. Okay, so let's go down and look at the bottom drive rail. So let's just resize the two views now, and we'll just look down on top. So with this, I'm going to select the two rails we've got at the bottom. So selecting the top one first, shift and pick the bottom one, and then we can say use selection to pick those two drive rails. You can see they are both running in the same direction. The first one is red because that was the first one picked, and the green one second because that was second. Now with that, I'm just going to go ahead now and pick this sort of triangular cross section as the cross section shape, and just switch off the scale cross section with width. And I'm going to switch between spans and switch that off for the minute, and we're just going to apply that. So we'll see in the 3D view now, and in the 2D view we've got this sort of Toblerone style long triangular shape created. So what is happening at the moment? So it's taking a cross section and placing it on that front drive rail there and driving it all the way through to the end, and you can see there this constant sort of cross section all the way across. Now, for instance, in some cases when you've got drive rails that have been independently created, they may be actually in the wrong direction. So what you may need to do is to reverse this. Now in this particular case, you can see the drive rail at the top there, the directional arrows are going from left to right. I can actually reverse that rail, and of course instantly you'll see that we're going to get some very strange shape, because we've got the top drive rail running from right to left and the bottom one running from left to right. So if I actually apply that, you'll see that we will eventually get a very, very odd looking surface. Okay, so we can see that as displayed on the screen. But I will actually reverse that back now, reverse that back, and then reapply, and we'll get back the original shape that we wanted. So this shows the implications of the sort of directional arrow on the drive rails, and why it plays an important part with the resultant two rail sweep that you get. Now similarly, we've got this triangular shape that we're driving along here, and you can see there that the long side happens to be shown from being driven from the top rail there, and we've got our short side coming back down to our second rail. Now what happens if we wanted this sort of rail reversed, and we wanted the long side to be driven up from the bottom and the short side coming down at this sort of top edge? Well, that's quite easy to do if we just simply come down now, and rather than saying reverse rail, we say swap rail order. Okay, so what was first becomes second, and what was second becomes first. So as you can see here, this point now on our cross section is starting at the lower left hand corner rather than the upper left corner. And now when I reapply, you'll see the sort of triangle shift now in the 3D and the 2D view, and clearly you can see that's swapped around. Okay, and similarly now if I swap that back around, swap rail order and reapply, we can see that we get that sort of change in shape. Okay, so that's really looking at the sort of the implications of the direction of the two rail sweeps, and also how we go about reversing the sort of orientation of a cross section on the drive rails. We actually do that from the drive rails and not from the cross section. Okay, so the next stage is to take a look at how sweep between spans actually affects the shape. Now to do that, I'm actually going to close out of this form and just delete the original component, and we'll take a look at the individual cross sections in terms of the number of spans and points. So I'm just going to select it and then go into the node editing mode, and we can see there are 3 nodes there and we have 2 spans. If we go to the cross section, the triangular section in the middle, once again we've got 2 spans and 3 nodes, and for the final shape we have 5 nodes and 4 spans. Okay, and these will have a direct effect over to whether we can use that command sweep between spans. So with this, I want to gain a bit more control. So ideally I want, for instance, the top node here, the middle node, to be transitioning in to this node on the rounded shape. Okay, now if we look at it normally from a typical 3D view, it will be doing this by a planar transition, so it will not be blending from node to node. But because we have the same number of nodes and the same number of spans, we can actually switch that on and gain greater control if I wanted to transition node to node. Okay, so with this now I'm just going to hit escape and come back into the form. So I'm going to select my 2 drive rails, go up to the 2 rail sweep command, use selection, they're going in the right direction. I can then come straight in, and in this case what I'm going to do, because I'm going to go from round to triangle to round, I'll select the round as the primary start point, and I'm just going to sweep between scans and have that switched off and apply. And now I'm going to just say, okay, I want to have the start and end with that shape. Okay, but take the middle sort of triangular cross section and put that somewhere in the middle. Okay, let's just reorientate the view so we can see what's happening in the 3D view, and we'll just apply that now to see what we are getting. Okay, so you can see if we twiddle that through, we are progressing basically sort of straight through the line of the model. Okay, so we're not looking at going really from this point here through to the point on the top and then back down. It's just literally looking at it planar from the top, and we've got this sort of constant line going across. So it's in this case not the shape I was looking for. It's not the control. I really want to drive it from node to node. So with that, I can actually come up and say sweep between spans. And if you have a look at the 3D view now, when I apply this, you'll see that that has transitioned very differently. So we've got really the point here on this sort of front edge is then transitioning through to the node at the top of the triangle and then back down to the node on that far edge. So in essence we are joining the middle nodes really of those 2 vectors. So that's how we can gain a little bit more control. And if we actually wanted now to go in and control the end shape with a different one, so if I come in now and say select this final cross section, now we have to remember that that's got 5 nodes on and 4 spans, so it doesn't match the other 2. So when I select that and put that in there, it's showing that we have 2 in the rounded shape, we have 2 spans in the angular shape, but we have 4 spans in this final selected shape. So when I apply that now, it will not be doing the sweep between spans, but it will be doing the linear movement across the 2 rail sweep surface. So when we apply that, you can see that now. We're looking, if you have a look down on the screen, you can see that sort of linear movement through there. We are not controlling it between node to node, span to span. So that really shows that where sweep between spans can give you more control if you start working with cross sections that have the same number of spans. Okay, before we move on and take a look at the closed rail sweep examples, I just want to show you one last feature, which is the way to look at how we transition between the 3 views when looking at it from a side view. So first of all, what I'm going to do is just overwrite this last cross section with the rounded shape. So I'm going to go and select the rounded shape, click on the edge there now, and then reapply. So we should have round going to triangle going to round. So if we have a look at that from the side view, okay, so with that I'm just going to take a look at the side view. Okay, we can see here that there is a sort of tangential flow from the front cross section and then through tangentially through the top angular cross section, and then flowing down to be tangentially into the final cross section. So we've got this nice smooth flow. It's going from sort of parallel to the XY plane through each of these 3 points. But I'd like to try and sort of manage that transition, actually have more of an angular change coming into this central vector. So with that, I can come over to the 2D view now and just right mouse key over the sort of start point of that cross section and go smooth and switch that off. So I'm just going to select it, that'll switch it off. We won't see anything in the 3D view till I apply. So now you can see, if we have a look, we rather than sort of tangential flow through this vector, we've got it coming in angular and coming out angular, and then obviously progressing in to the final vector. So we can see that if I actually change the view there, we can see that sort of change there. Okay, so we've got quite a noticeable difference in there based upon how we've transitioned the cross sections from one to the other, and I've changed this from smooth to be angular, and I can change that back now. If I reselect that and we have a look again from the side view, you'll be able to see now, if I reapply, we're going to get that nice smooth transition again. So that just shows the nature of selecting smooth on and off for a particular cross section. Okay, so let's close out of this particular project and open up the closed rail example. So I'm not going to save the changes, and I'm going to open the closed rail. And we're now presented with just two vectors on the screen, sort of a closed profile and then an open profile, which looks to be like the cross section. Okay, so to use the two rail sweep command, we need two rails. So with that, I'm going to select the current closed profile, go across to the offset and layout menu and select the offset command, and we're going to go outwards by just 1 inch, but importantly I'm going to keep the create sharp offset corner switched on so we don't get a rounding of the external corners when offsetting outwards. So with that, I offset. I've still got my sharp, which is what I want. I can close that out now, and I'm going to immediately come straight in and select my outer profile, my inner profile, come into the modeling command and the two rail sweep option, and use selection to select those two rails, and then my cross section in the middle, and go straight to apply. So I'm just going to switch off the other options and apply, and we'll see what we get on the screen. So you can see it's taking quite a long time to calculate, signifying there's probably an issue with the resultant model. And if we have a look at these side by side, you can see that the 3D representation isn't what I was expecting. So let's take a look at some of the issues that we need to consider when creating this type of component. Well, we can look straight in. We can see the bottom one is running from sort of left to right, whereas the top one is running sort of from right to left. So I'm just going to reverse the outside one now. So we're going to say reverse rail, and now I'm going to apply and see if we get any change. So once again, it's taking quite a long time to calculate, signifying there's still an issue. Okay, so we still have a problem here, and if we zoom out, and we can see there that the start points of both the two vectors are in different locations, therefore we're getting the sort of twisting of the resultant component. So the best thing to do is to come down to, say, here I'm looking at the lower left hand corner and say make start point, and then I'm going to go to the top one here and make start point, and we can see if we click across there now, we've got a nice cross section going across that corner, which is what I expect. So if I now press apply, will I be getting what's expected? The answer is close, but not quite. It's good in the bottom left and right corner, but certainly not in the upper reaches of the profile. So we need to look at these corners, and one way to do that is to actually copy this to add to all rail nodes, which is essentially copying the cross section across each of the nodes. So I'm going to select that now. You can see that that's placed those in those locations. You can see it's going node to node, node to node, and we're going to get a nice sharp in the corner. And now if we actually zoom out and apply, we can see that we get a much better result. Now, everything looks okay, but if we actually twiddle the 3D view, it looks very, very flat. Okay, we're not getting this sort of nice steep vertical wall that we're expecting, and this is because it's actually taking the sort of profile and flattening it down between here. So we need to actually look at modifying our cross-sectional vector. Okay, so I'm just going to reset that now. We don't want that. Close that out and come in and take a look at the vector itself. So I need to add in some extra an extra line off the end point here. So I'm just going to come down and join across. We found that line that we need. I'm now going to select those two vectors, join them into one, and now we've got one single vector for the cross section where we're going to get this nice vertical surface now. So coming back into the command, I'm just going to select the outer vector, select the inner one, come across to the two rail sweep, use those two. It's remembered the start points, which is good, and the directions. I can come back in and pick my cross section, and I'll apply that now. And we've got what looks like a pretty good shape, but once again it's not been copied into the corner, so I'm just going to select the bottom left hand profile, then right mouse key on that cross section and say add to all nodes. We can see everything looks okay, and apply, and that's sorted out the corners. But the problem is my vertical edge really should be on the inside and not the outside. So what I'm going to do is just come onto any one of the two rails and do swap rail order, and then I apply, and that will flip that. So rather than flipping the cross section, we flip the drive rails, which will give me exactly what I want. Okay, now one thing to remember, that I was allowed to do the add to all rail nodes because we had an even number of nodes on each of the two drive rails. Now if I actually reset this and come out, and we're going to distort one of the profiles. So I'm going to come in now and take the inner one, hit N on the keyboard to go to node editing mode, and I'm going to add in some extra points. Okay, so clearly we have two more extra points on the inner one than the outer one. So I'm going to hit escape on my keyboard, come back in now, select my two drive rails, into the command, then pick the cross section. Everything looks okay, and I apply. I get my command, I'm going to select the bottom left hand corner, then just say copy. Add to all rail nodes is switched off. Okay, so how do I get around this in this case? Well, the only way to do it is to actually do this manually. So I'm just going to come in and just select the points where I want this to be. Okay, and clearly you can see they're not matching, so we're going to need to make a little bit of modification. So with this, I'm going to come up now and just simply hold my left mouse key down and just move the node into position, okay, which has distorted that. And we're going to move this one across, okay, and then come across to the other side, and once again move the node into correct place. And we should now have this exactly how we would want, and I can once again go ahead and press apply. So everything looks okay, apart from the fact that we actually want the vertical edge on the inside, in which case I'm just going to go right mouse key, swap rail order, and apply. So we're getting very close to what we want, but ideally I want this sort of central area to be filled in, ready for some engraving. So with that, on the form we have fill center of inner closed vector rails. So I'm going to switch that on and apply. And now I'm ready to commit this, so I'm going to save this as frame and apply, and we've created our component. So with that, that shows all the options now for using the two rail sweep command. We looked at the option for single rails, where we looked at all the different types of ways that we can modify and gain control, and we've looked at the closed rail sweep example, where we've looked at the common issues that you may face, such as the reversing of rails, maybe not having a cross section quite right, being able to make sure that you've got the angular changes in the corners that are required. Each of these will need to be sort of carefully looked at when creating your finished component.